In the grand theater of human existence, where power dynamics shift like sand dunes in an endless desert, there exists a fundamental truth that separates the masters from the masses: the ability to think independently while appearing to conform. This is not merely a philosophical concept but a practical methodology that can transform an ordinary mind into an extraordinary instrument of influence and self-preservation. The Renaissance courts of Italy, where Niccolò Machiavelli observed the intricate dance of power, provided the perfect laboratory for understanding human nature in its rawest form. Here, amid the marble halls and whispered conspiracies, a profound realization emerged: those who controlled their own minds controlled their destinies, while those who allowed others to shape their thoughts became mere pawns in games they never understood they were playing. Consider the case of Lorenzo de' Medici, who navigated the treacherous waters of Florentine politics not through brute force or inherited privilege alone, but through a sophisticated understanding of how minds work, both his own and others. He possessed what we might call the ultimate mind hack, the ability to think several moves ahead while maintaining the appearance of spontaneous decision-making. This skill set him apart from contemporaries who were either too transparent in their machinations or too rigid in their thinking patterns. The foundation of this mental transformation begins with a critical understanding: your mind is constantly under siege. From the moment you wake until you fall asleep, countless forces attempt to shape your thoughts, opinions, and decisions. Advertisers deploy psychological techniques refined over decades to make you want things you never knew existed. Politicians craft messages designed to trigger specific emotional responses. Social media algorithms feed you information that keeps you engaged but not necessarily informed. Even well-meaning friends and family members unconsciously attempt to mold your perspective to align with their own comfort zones. Most people navigate this landscape with the mental equivalent of walking naked through a battlefield. They absorb influences indiscriminately, react emotionally to stimuli designed to provoke such reactions, and make decisions based on incomplete or deliberately distorted information. They believe they are thinking independently when they are actually dancing to rhythms composed by others. This is not a moral failing but a structural disadvantage in a world where information warfare has become as sophisticated as any military campaign. The truly intelligent individual, however, develops what could be called cognitive sovereignty, the ability to maintain independent thought processes while simultaneously understanding and leveraging the psychological forces at play around them. This goes far beyond simple skepticism or contrarian thinking, which are often just different forms of reactive behavior. True cognitive sovereignty involves creating a mental framework that filters information effectively, processes it objectively, and generates responses that serve your genuine interests rather than the interests of those seeking to influence you. The first component of this framework is what Machiavelli would recognize as the cultivation of strategic awareness. This involves developing an acute consciousness of the multiple layers of motivation that drive human behavior, including your own. When someone presents you with information, your mind should automatically analyze not just the content but the context. Who benefits if you believe this? What actions are they hoping to inspire? What information might they be omitting or emphasizing? What psychological triggers are they employing? This level of analysis might seem exhausting, but, like any skill, it becomes second nature with practice. The Renaissance princes who survived the constant plotting and scheming of their era did so not because they were paranoid, but because they had trained themselves to see patterns and motivations that others missed. They understood that every interaction contained multiple layers of meaning, and they had developed the mental agility to navigate these layers without becoming overwhelmed by complexity. The second component involves developing what might be called emotional intelligence armor. This is not about suppressing emotions or becoming coldly calculating, but rather about understanding how emotions can be weaponized against you and learning to process them in ways that enhance rather than compromise your decision-making abilities. Fear, anger, desire, and even compassion can all be exploited by those who understand how to push the right buttons at the right time. A master of this discipline learns to feel emotions fully while maintaining analytical distance from them. When someone attempts to make you angry, you notice the anger, understand its source and purpose, but choose your response based on strategic rather than emotional considerations. When fear arises, you examine whether it is based on genuine threats or manufactured ones designed to make you more compliant. This is not emotional numbness but emotional sophistication. The historical record is filled with examples of brilliant individuals who possessed extraordinary technical or creative abilities but who were easily manipulated through their emotional vulnerabilities. They could solve complex mathematical equations or create masterful works of art, but they could not recognize when their pride was being stroked to make them more amenable to exploitation, or when their fears were being amplified to drive them toward specific decisions. The third component of cognitive sovereignty involves mastering the art of strategic communication. This means learning to express yourself in ways that achieve your objectives without revealing more about your thinking process than necessary. Most people communicate either too transparently, giving others easy access to their psychological pressure points, or too opaquely, creating unnecessary confusion and conflict. Strategic communication requires understanding your audience and crafting your message to resonate with their interests and mental frameworks while maintaining your own agenda. This is not manipulation in the sense of deliberate deception, but rather skillful adaptation of your communication style to maximize effectiveness. A skilled practitioner can advocate for the same position to different audiences using completely different arguments and emotional appeals, not because they are being dishonest, but because they understand that different minds process information differently. Consider how a master politician might advocate for an environmental protection policy. To a business audience, they might emphasize economic opportunities and competitive advantages. To a conservation group, they might focus on ecological benefits and moral imperatives. To a security-minded audience, they might frame it as a matter of national resilience and resource security. Each message is truthful but tailored to the specific psychological landscape of its intended recipients. This skill extends beyond formal presentations to everyday interactions. Learning to recognize what motivates the people around you, what they fear, what they desire, what they respect, allows you to communicate in ways that minimize friction while maximizing your ability to achieve your objectives. This is not about becoming a manipulative person but about becoming an effective person who can navigate human relationships with skill and grace. The fourth component involves developing what could be called informational omnivory combined with analytical sophistication. This means deliberately exposing yourself to a wide range of information sources, including those that challenge your existing beliefs, while maintaining robust critical thinking capabilities. Most people either limit themselves to information that confirms their existing worldview, or they consume information so indiscriminately that they become confused and paralyzed by contradictory inputs. The sophisticated approach involves actively seeking out high-quality information from diverse perspectives while developing increasingly refined methods for evaluating credibility, identifying bias, and synthesizing complex information into actionable insights. This requires cultivating relationships with people who think differently than you do, reading materials that challenge your assumptions, and regularly testing your beliefs against new evidence. A practitioner of this approach might deliberately subscribe to publications across the political spectrum, not because they agree with all of them, but because they understand that each perspective often contains useful information that others overlook or dismiss. They might seek out conversations with people whose life experiences are radically different from their own, not to adopt their viewpoints wholesale, but to understand how different circumstances shape different ways of seeing the world. The key is maintaining analytical independence throughout this process. Exposure to diverse viewpoints should expand your understanding without undermining your ability to form your own judgments. This requires developing a kind of intellectual confidence that allows you to consider ideas without feeling threatened by them, and to change your mind when evidence warrants it without losing your sense of identity or direction. The fifth component of this mental framework involves mastering the delicate balance between confidence and adaptability. Many people oscillate between rigid dogmatism and directionless flexibility, neither of which serves them well in a complex and rapidly changing world. True cognitive sovereignty requires the ability to hold strong convictions based on careful analysis while remaining open to new information that might require adjusting those convictions. This balance manifests in several ways. In decision-making, it means being decisive when action is required while remaining alert to information that might indicate a change of course is needed. In interactions with others, it means projecting confidence without arrogance, and demonstrating flexibility without appearing weak or indecisive. In planning, it means having clear long-term objectives while maintaining tactical adaptability in how you pursue them. Historical figures who embodied this principle successfully often appeared paradoxical to their contemporaries. They could be remarkably consistent in their core values and objectives while being surprisingly flexible in their methods and alliances. They understood that changing circumstances require adapted approaches, but that constant change in fundamental direction leads to confusion and ineffectiveness. The development of these capabilities requires deliberate practice and patience. Like learning a musical instrument or mastering a sport, cognitive sovereignty is not achieved through reading about it but through consistent application of its principles in real-world situations. Start with low-stakes interactions where you can practice analyzing motivations, managing emotional responses, and communicating strategically without serious consequences if you make mistakes. Pay attention to how different people respond to different types of communication. Notice which of your own emotional buttons are easily pushed and by whom. Experiment with seeking out information sources that challenge your assumptions. Keep a mental journal of predictions you make about human behavior and see how often you are correct. Over time, patterns will emerge that help you refine your approach. One particularly valuable exercise involves observing group dynamics in various settings: business meetings, social gatherings, family interactions, public events. Try to identify who holds real influence versus who holds apparent authority, how decisions actually get made versus how they appear to get made, what unspoken rules govern behavior, and how information flows through the group. This kind of observation develops your ability to see beneath surface appearances, to understand underlying power structures and influence patterns. Another useful practice involves analyzing your own decision-making processes. Before making important choices, try to identify all the factors influencing your thinking: emotional reactions, social pressures, information sources, personal biases, and external incentives. The goal is not to eliminate these influences but to understand them clearly so you can account for them in your decision-making process. As these skills develop, you will likely notice several changes in how you experience the world. Interactions that once seemed confusing or frustrating begin to make sense as you recognize the underlying patterns of human motivation and communication. You find yourself less reactive to attempts at emotional manipulation and more able to respond thoughtfully even in charged situations. Your ability to predict how others will behave in various circumstances improves dramatically, giving you significant advantages in planning and negotiation. Perhaps most importantly, you develop a sense of mental freedom that many people never experience. Instead of feeling pushed around by circumstances and other people's agendas, you begin to feel like the author of your own story. This does not mean you can control everything that happens to you, but it does mean you can maintain agency in how you interpret and respond to events. This transformation often creates interesting challenges in relationships with people who have not developed similar capabilities. You may find that conversations that once engaged you now seem superficial or manipulative. Friends or colleagues who rely on emotional pressure or social conformity to get their way may become frustrated with your increased independence. Family members might interpret your new analytical approach as coldness or rejection of shared values. Navigating these challenges requires developing what might be called social camouflage, the ability to maintain your cognitive sovereignty while presenting yourself in ways that don't unnecessarily threaten or alienate others. This involves learning when to reveal your analytical processes and when to keep them private, how to express disagreement without creating conflict, and how to maintain authentic relationships while protecting your mental independence. The key insight here is that most people are more comfortable with others who think similarly to themselves, not because they are malicious, but because different approaches to thinking can feel threatening or incomprehensible. By learning to translate your thoughts into language and frameworks that others can relate to, you can maintain your relationships while preserving your intellectual freedom. This does not mean being dishonest or manipulative, but rather being skillful in how you communicate. A person who has developed sophisticated analytical capabilities might express their conclusions in ways that emphasize shared values and common ground rather than highlighting the analytical processes that led to those conclusions. They might ask questions that guide others toward insights rather than simply stating those insights directly. They might frame their perspectives in terms of practical benefits rather than abstract principles. Advanced practitioners of this approach often develop what appears to be an almost supernatural ability to predict and influence events. This is not because they possess mystical powers, but because they have trained themselves to see patterns and connections that others miss, and to position themselves advantageously within those patterns. They understand that most human behavior follows predictable patterns, and they have learned to recognize those patterns early and respond appropriately. This capability becomes particularly powerful when combined with patience and long-term thinking. While others react to immediate circumstances and obvious pressures, the cognitively sovereign individual can identify trends and forces that will shape future events and position themselves accordingly. They can recognize when current popular opinions are likely to shift, when emerging technologies will disrupt existing industries, when political or social movements are gaining or losing momentum, and when individual people are likely to change their positions or priorities. The compound effect of these advantages over time can be extraordinary. Small improvements in decision-making quality, multiplied across hundreds or thousands of decisions over years or decades, create massive differences in outcomes. Better ability to identify opportunities and threats, combined with more skillful navigation of human relationships, opens doors that remain closed to others. Enhanced credibility and influence, built through consistent demonstration of good judgment and effective communication, create access to information and resources that further amplify capabilities. However, with great capability comes great responsibility, and the development of cognitive sovereignty raises important ethical considerations. The same skills that protect you from manipulation can be used to manipulate others. The analytical capabilities that help you understand motivations and predict behavior can be employed to exploit vulnerabilities rather than simply navigate around them. The communication skills that help you express yourself effectively can be used to deceive as easily as to inform. The question of how to use these capabilities ethically is not merely academic. People who develop significant advantages in understanding and influencing human behavior inevitably face situations where they could benefit significantly by using those skills in ways that harm others. The temptation to rationalize such choices can be strong, particularly when the potential victims are people you dislike or when the benefits seem to outweigh the costs. Machiavelli himself grappled with these questions extensively, and his conclusions have been debated for centuries. His fundamental insight was that ethical behavior in a complex world requires strategic thinking, not just good intentions. Pure idealism often leads to ineffectiveness, which ultimately serves no one well. But pure pragmatism without ethical constraints leads to a degradation of the social fabric that ultimately undermines everyone's interests, including your own. The most sophisticated approach to this challenge involves developing what might be called enlightened self-interest, a framework that recognizes that your long-term well-being is interconnected with the well-being of others and the health of the systems you operate within. This perspective suggests that using your capabilities to benefit yourself at the expense of others is ultimately self-defeating, because it contributes to a more hostile and unreliable environment that will eventually work against you. This does not mean adopting a naive approach that ignores the realities of competition and conflict. There will always be situations where your interests genuinely conflict with those of others, and where decisive action is required to protect yourself or advance legitimate objectives. The key is distinguishing between necessary strategic action and unnecessary exploitation, and consistently choosing approaches that create value rather than merely transferring it from others to yourself. One practical application of this principle involves using your analytical capabilities to identify win-win solutions that might not be obvious to others. Your enhanced ability to understand motivations and predict responses allows you to craft proposals and strategies that serve multiple parties' interests simultaneously. This approach often proves more effective than zero-sum thinking, because it builds alliances and reduces resistance rather than creating enemies and inspiring retaliation. Another application involves using your communication skills to elevate rather than manipulate conversations. Instead of exploiting others' cognitive biases and emotional vulnerabilities, you can help them think more clearly and make better decisions for themselves. This approach builds trust and credibility while contributing to a more intelligent and functional social environment that benefits everyone, including you. As you develop these capabilities, you may also find yourself in positions where you can influence how others develop their own cognitive sovereignty. This presents both an opportunity and a responsibility. Teaching others to think more independently and analytically can seem counterintuitive if you view the world as a zero-sum competition, but it actually serves enlightened self-interest by creating a more sophisticated and trustworthy network of relationships. People who have developed cognitive sovereignty themselves are generally more interesting to interact with, more reliable as allies, and more capable of contributing value in collaborative efforts. They are also less likely to fall victim to demagogues and manipulators who thrive on exploiting cognitive vulnerabilities. By helping to raise the general level of analytical sophistication in your environment, you contribute to a context that rewards merit and intelligence rather than manipulation and conformity. The cultivation of cognitive sovereignty is ultimately a lifelong journey rather than a destination. As the world becomes more complex and the tools for influencing human behavior become more sophisticated, the requirements for maintaining independent thought and effective action continue to evolve. What worked in previous decades may be insufficient for current challenges, and what works today may need adaptation for future circumstances. This reality requires maintaining a commitment to continuous learning and self-improvement. The same analytical tools that help you understand external situations must be regularly applied to examining your own thinking processes for biases, blind spots, and outdated assumptions. The same openness to diverse information sources that protects you from manipulation by others must include willingness to update your own methods and perspectives based on new evidence. The most successful practitioners of this approach often develop what might be called metacognitive awareness, consciousness not just of what they think but of how they think, and the ability to modify their thinking processes as circumstances require. They become students of their own minds as much as students of external reality, constantly refining their mental tools and testing their effectiveness against real-world results. This metacognitive dimension extends to understanding the psychological and physiological factors that influence cognitive performance. Factors such as stress levels, sleep quality, physical fitness, nutrition, and social connections all affect mental clarity and decision-making capabilities. A sophisticated approach to cognitive sovereignty includes optimizing these underlying conditions to maintain peak mental performance over time. It also involves understanding how cognitive capabilities can be enhanced through various practices and technologies. Meditation and mindfulness practices can improve emotional regulation and analytical clarity. Strategic reading and learning can expand knowledge bases and conceptual frameworks. Deliberate exposure to challenging situations can build mental resilience and adaptability. Even emerging technologies like cognitive enhancement tools may eventually provide additional capabilities for those who understand how to use them effectively. The ultimate goal of developing cognitive sovereignty is not to become invulnerable to all external influence, which would be both impossible and undesirable, but to ensure that the influences you do accept are ones you have chosen consciously based on careful evaluation. This creates a form of mental freedom that allows you to engage fully with the world while maintaining your agency and integrity. This freedom manifests in numerous ways throughout daily life. In professional settings, you can pursue opportunities and navigate office politics based on genuine merit and strategic considerations rather than being manipulated by flattery, intimidation, or groupthink. In personal relationships, you can respond to others based on authentic feelings and rational assessment rather than unconscious emotional programming or social expectations. In consumption decisions, you can choose products and services based on actual value and need rather than artificial desire created by sophisticated marketing techniques. Perhaps most importantly, this mental freedom allows you to participate in larger social and political processes as a genuine citizen rather than as a manipulable consumer of propaganda. In an era where information warfare has become a dominant force in shaping public opinion and policy, the ability to think independently while understanding the psychological techniques being employed against you is not just personally beneficial but democratically essential. The aggregation of individually sovereign minds creates the possibility of collective intelligence that can address complex challenges more effectively than masses of people responding predictably to emotional manipulation. When enough people develop the capability to think clearly about complex issues, communicate effectively across differences of opinion, and resist attempts at manipulation, the entire society benefits through better decision-making processes and more intelligent resource allocation. This vision of widespread cognitive sovereignty may seem optimistic given current trends toward polarization and manipulation in public discourse. However, the same technologies and techniques that enable mass manipulation also create opportunities for mass education and empowerment. The Internet provides unprecedented access to diverse information sources and analytical tools. Social networks, despite their flaws, enable like-minded individuals to find each other and share knowledge across geographic and cultural boundaries. The key is understanding that cognitive sovereignty is not just a personal skill but a cultural movement that requires collective effort to sustain and spread. Each person who develops these capabilities and uses them ethically contributes to a social environment that rewards intelligence over manipulation, collaboration over exploitation, and wisdom over mere cleverness. The path forward requires patience, persistence, and recognition that real change happens gradually through the accumulation of individual transformations rather than through dramatic wholesale shifts. Every conversation in which you model clear thinking and ethical communication, every decision you make based on careful analysis rather than emotional reaction, every time you resist manipulation while treating others with dignity and respect, contributes to a cultural shift toward greater intelligence and integrity. The mind hack that multiplies your intelligence and keeps you beyond control is not a trick or shortcut but a comprehensive approach to mental development that honors both individual excellence and collective well-being. It recognizes that true power comes not from dominating others but from mastering yourself, not from exploiting weaknesses but from building strengths, not from creating dependency but from fostering capability. In the end, the greatest victory is not defeating others but becoming the kind of person you genuinely respect, operating with the kind of mind you genuinely trust, and contributing to the kind of world you genuinely want to live in. This is the ultimate expression of Machiavellian wisdom, understanding that your highest self-interest lies in becoming your best self and helping to create conditions that allow others to do the same. The Renaissance may be long past, but the fundamental challenges of navigating complex human systems while maintaining personal integrity remain as relevant today as they were in Machiavelli's time. The tools and techniques may have evolved, but the underlying principles of cognitive sovereignty continue to offer a path toward both personal effectiveness and collective flourishing. The choice to develop these capabilities is ultimately a choice about what kind of person you want to become and what kind of world you want to help create. In a time when technological and social changes are accelerating rapidly, when information abundance and manipulation techniques are reaching unprecedented sophistication, when global challenges require collective intelligence and cooperation on scales never before attempted, the development of cognitive sovereignty is not just an individual advantage but a contribution to humanity's collective wisdom and resilience. The mind that thinks clearly, communicates skillfully, and acts ethically in pursuit of enlightened objectives is a mind that serves not just its own interests but the interests of all who benefit from a more intelligent and functional human civilization. This is the true power that Machiavelli understood but that many of his interpreters have missed, the power that comes from aligning personal excellence with collective flourishing, individual sovereignty with social responsibility, strategic thinking with ethical action. The journey toward cognitive sovereignty begins with a single decision to think more carefully about your own thinking, and it continues through a lifetime of deliberate practice and continuous refinement. Each step along this path increases both your effectiveness in achieving your objectives and your contribution to the development of a wiser, more capable human community. In this way, the ancient art of principled power becomes a modern methodology for personal development and social progress, proving that the most enduring insights about human nature remain as valuable today as they were 5 centuries ago.